Welcome to Biscuits and Jam from Southern Living. I'm your host, Sid Evans. And today I'm talking with a singer-songwriter who's one of the most exciting young artists in Nashville. Caroline Jones grew up near New York City, where she studied classical music and opera. But by high school, she had fallen hard for traditional country. Recently, she became the first female member of the Zac Brown Band, where she's made her mark as a fiercely talented multi-instrumentalist. But she's also developing a solo career and releasing a new album with a little help from one of her musical heroes. We'll talk about all that and how a show at the Bluebird Cafe changed her life on this week's Biscuits and Jam. Caroline Jones, welcome to Biscuits and Jam.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Caroline, I've just got to tell you, I'm from Memphis, and your father is from Memphis.
He is.
It's one of the great music cities in the world, of course. Do you have strong connections to that town?
I do, because of my dad and because of the members of my family that still live there. My grandfather just died 2 years ago during COVID, but he lived there. My grandparents lived there for a long time. Obviously, my grandmother before she died. And I still have cousins there. I still have my aunt and uncle there. My dad doesn't live there anymore, but it's obviously sewn into his soul, the culture of that town. And I think the music, to a certain degree, he grew up listening to a lot of Motown, Stax, R&B, classic rock. You know, even though Memphis is in Tennessee, right next to Arkansas, I mean, it's not very country. My dad did not grow up listening to country music
Not at all. Yeah.
He said it was looked upon as pretty backwards when he was growing up, which is kind of funny thinking of how close it is to Nashville. But it was a big R&B blues town. And, you know, I've shot music videos there. My video, The Difference, part of it is shot there on Beale Street. So yeah, I love going back to Memphis when I get a chance to.
Well, I do too. I actually went back last year, and your father and I went to the same high school.
Really?
Memphis University School. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, MUS. I think I've performed there, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can't remember if it's that or his elementary school, PDS, Presbyterian Day School.
Yeah, I went there too.
I performed at one of them. Really? Oh my gosh, wait, I gotta make that connection. That's so cool.
Well, he was a little bit ahead of me, but I went back, and it was his 50th reunion at MUS.
Yeah, he went last year, yeah.
And it was late on a Friday afternoon, and he was giving a talk about failure.
Yes.
And by the end of the talk, he had the entire student body standing on their feet, which was kind of incredible for a bunch of high school kids on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, he was rehearsing that for a really long time. He takes those kind of opportunities really, really seriously. And he's kind of weirdly or unconventionally theatrical. I think those are his moments where he thinks he's a rock star. And so he took out the sword. He was trying to be a character. He was, you know, to engage young men, you got to pull out all the stops. So he was really excited about that.
Well, it was a great talk, and at the end, he had them playing Chariots of Fire, and he was swinging a sword. And
exactly. Yes.
It was very dramatic.
This is all tracking.
So, yeah. So, all right, I have a question for you. What are some things that he taught you about failure?
That's a great question. My dad is one of those folks who really lives by example. He doesn't dole out advice cheaply or liberally. He's one of those people that won't dole it out unless you ask him. But he really leads by example. I think one thing he's really good at that I feel like I haven't gotten good at yet in my life, but I want to, is he's really good at navigating the successes and the failures unemotionally. And for a creative artist like me, that's really difficult, because it's not as simple as a good or a bad trade. It's your whole soul and your heart. You know, it's your songs, it's your thoughts, it's your feelings, it's your livelihood. It's hours and hours and hours of blood, sweat, and tears, which obviously I have in common with anyone who's really good at their job or takes their job seriously or is passionate about it. But I feel like it's very hard to emotionally disconnect from your art. it's a skill that he's been able to develop in his job. So that's something I'm still trying to learn. And honestly, I think it's a good life skill. All the spiritual and religious teachings teach us non-attachment, and it's just very human to be very attached.
Yeah, sure.
So that's something I think he's taught me about failure. And I think the humility of learning at every age, of the older that you get, actually, the more open you are to being wrong and willing to learn. And actually, that's something my husband's really taught me too, is not being afraid of that. You know, you kind of have to have this chip on your shoulder as an artist, especially when you're young, because you get rejected a lot and there's thousands of people trying to chase the same dream as you. And you kind of have to have this blind belief in yourself. So you can be pretty narrow-minded about like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. Here's my ambition. Here's my drive. No one's going to stand in my way. But the downside of that is you can be pretty closed to new ideas or to being wrong. It seems like the stakes are really high, you know? So I think as you get older and more confident and learn who you are more, you become more open to learning and by definition being wrong and failing. And it just becomes less of an embarrassment or a high stakes situation. It just becomes part of being human and actually something that really connects you to the people on your team, to your audience, to other human beings. My latest song is kind of about that ultimately it's really our imperfections and failures that are our connection points, because that's what makes us human.
Yeah, I heard that, and I wanted to talk about that in a minute because it sounds like as confident as you are as a singer and an artist, you weren't always that way, at least based on what's in the song.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm still not. We're all human beings and we're all navigating, especially being an artist. You're such a seeker just by definition. And part of being a seeker is being really self-aware, which is a blessing and a curse because you see all your areas for improvement. I can be really hard on myself, but it can also be a blessing because you have a lot of drive and ambition. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I think that we all have insecurities, and I know that now I'm pregnant right now. So
yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much. But that's like another layer of trying to navigate and be a model for someone, knowing that you're going to be imperfect, that you are imperfect, and how to navigate those insecurities and try not to model them for your children, but also try to be honest about the fact that we're all insecure and we're all learning and we're all imperfect.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, Caroline, I wanted to talk about food for a minute.
Yeah.
So you grew up outside of New York City, but you were periodically making trips down south. Did you grow up with an appreciation for Southern food?
I did through my dad. And this is so funny because if you contrasted my and my dad's taste in food, it couldn't be more opposite. But we actually both appreciate Southern food on very different ends of the spectrum. My dad is very basic in his love for all things sweet, all things carby, all things junk food. He's not an adventurous eater. He never has been. I think he jokes that he didn't have a vegetable, like a baked potato even, till he was 20. He just ate fried chicken and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
And maybe barbecue.
Yep. Yeah. And rendezvous ribs till he moved to New York City. Whereas I would say I grew up, by the time I was a teenager, I actually got really into health and wellness. And that's more from my mom, as you can probably guess, not from my dad. But I had some kind of health issues and hormonal issues as a teenager and started researching health and nutrition. And so when I actually went to college in New York City, I got really into food and cooking because New York City, many people don't know this, but has amazing farmers markets.
Yeah.
And so I got really into local farms and local farmers and buying local and supporting local agriculture and cooking. And that was something that I really dove into in my college years. So then going down to Nashville, because I made a lot of trips starting at age 17 when I got really into country music. That tradition of slow cooking in the South, it's just sustainable by definition because people still grow food down there and still have the slow cooking movement down there and eat fresh and eat local and eat in season. And we've kind of lost that in a lot of parts of America. So that was something I really noticed in the South when I first started going down there.
When you think about your family down there, is there a cook who really stands out, whether it's a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle or anyone?
Yeah, it's actually my Uncle Peter. He's really into organic farming, sustainability, ecology. He's been farming he was a hippie in the 60s. So you can say he's been doing it for many, many decades. But he's taught me a lot and inspired me a lot with his knowledge of the land, of farming. They have a farm outside of Memphis, and he grows meat too. And he's an amazing griller and knows how to raise the animals in the way that animals ought to be raised.
Is there a recipe that stands out?
Oh, gosh. The way he prepares any of the pork or beef.
He's a griller.
Yeah. Or smoking, yeah.
So, Caroline, I'm really curious about how you kind of came to country music. I mean, you grew up in the Northeast.
Yeah.
About as far from the country universe as a person can get. Although, of course, country music is really everywhere. But when did this music really start to resonate with you?
When I was 17, I grew up listening to almost every genre but country. I grew up listening to a lot of my mom and dad's music, as most kids do. So a lot of classic R&B, classic rock, a lot of the divas of the 90s like Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Celine Dion, Barbra Streisand, Boyz II Men. And then I was trained classically in opera and jazz. I begged my parents for singing lessons when I was 9. And the singing teacher they found, they didn't really know what they were doing. They just asked for a referral from someone whose kid had a singing teacher. And I just happened to find a singing teacher who trained me classically in opera and jazz. So I was listening to that. And then I got really into folk music in my early teens, discovered Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Carole King and Gordon Lightfoot. And then when I was 17, I had my first manager and I was making demos on Long Island with a producer. And my manager at the time said, there's some country sensibility in your music. And I was like, what? Like, I remember, I think the extent of my country knowledge was like Shania Twain or some of those crossover stars.
Good place to start.
Yeah, she is incredible. But I was really surprised. Nashville is kind of the last place where commercial music is made, where there's still a real focus on authenticity and the kind of values that you're about. And I think he was pretty protective of me because I was a young girl and he didn't want to throw me to the wolves in pop music. And he just loved the fact that Nashville was so focused on the song, that there's a real sense of community there with the songwriters and musicians and producers. And there's also a real sense of graduating to different levels, learning the ropes of the genre and learning the ropes of the industry and not being thrown into something too quickly. And so he encouraged me to go down to Nashville, and I went to a show at the Bluebird Cafe, which some of your listeners will know. It's a very famous singer-songwriter venue in Nashville and a tiny hole in the wall, but super iconic. And I went to a show there, and it was just like a lightning strike. I had no idea previously that there was a whole genre of music and community of people that was built around storytelling, authenticity. I'd never seen folks sit in a room with just a guitar and their voice and a story and just capture my heart like that. And I just became obsessed. I still went to college in New York, but I did all my country music homework. I started at the Carter Family and Jimmy Rogers in the late 30s and early 40s, and I went forward and just listened to all of it and just fell in love with it and, found it as the missing piece in my artistry. I'm not traditional country by any means. The term is widening so much these days. But I do feel like the foundational principles of country music I really resonate with.
So when it comes to songwriting, what was the first song that you wrote that you were really proud of?
Gosh, well, I started writing songs when I was about 10 or 11, and I was really proud of them. I mean, they weren't that good, but I can't say I wasn't proud of them. Especially when you're a kid and you have a big imagination and you love writing as much as I did. You think everything you write is incredible. which is honestly such a pure, beautiful thing. To this day, there's no rush like writing a song. I've been so lucky to have that since I was a kid. It is a gift to have something in your life that you feel that way about. When I was 10 or 11, I used to write kind of existential, spiritual songs. So my first songs were about heaven and the meaning of life and all kinds of things that 10 and 11-year-olds, I'm not sure that's a typical conversation starter on the playground, but I was an odd one. I would say I really started to get proud of my songs when I was in college and I started making independent records. Now I'm not proud of them, but I was at the time.
After the break, I'll talk more with Caroline Jones about her songwriting process, as well as her collaborations with Vince Gill and the Zac Brown Band. Welcome back to Biscuits and Jam from Southern Living. I'm Sid Evans, and today I'm talking with the singer-songwriter Caroline Jones. So Caroline, you play all sorts of instruments: piano, guitar, dobro, harmonica, banjo. I'm probably forgetting a few.
Yep, no, that's right.
When you sit down to write a song, are you usually composing it on one instrument or kind of mix it up?
I usually mix it up, especially if I'm working on it for a while. But I love writing from a really compelling musical idea because I get really bored otherwise with the same melodies and same chords. So if I can come up with a cool lick on the dobro or the banjo or a beautiful melody or chord sequence on the piano, that's my favorite. And then I'll usually jump from instrument to instrument, trying to imagine in my mind how the song could come to life production-wise, because I love production, so with a band behind it.
Caroline, you've been in Nashville for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first year like in that town?
Well, my first experience in Nashville, I wasn't living there yet, but my first year was as wide-eyed and bushy-tailed as a person could be. I was so excited and so inspired by every single songwriter and every single producer that I met. I just could not believe the quality of talent in the town, and I still feel that way. It was like magic to me, and it still is, that this is an industry where this is people's livelihood and jobs. We're just pulling magic out of the air. That's our whole job. And the more you can keep that attitude, actually, the better off you are, because it gets harder as you get more into the industry and as you get a little older, and people get jaded and people get cynical because of the business side and because of how hard it is to break through. But I always try to retain that admiration, inspiration, and magic that I first felt when I came to Nashville. But I would say my first official year in Nashville, I was living at Zac's place, and I was in between tours because I was already touring at the time, opening, and I was writing, recording, meeting folks, taking meetings, all the things that everyone does in Nashville.
You've gotten to not only meet, but to play with some of your heroes, like Vince Gill.
Yeah.
And you have a new song out with him called By Way of Sorrow, and it's on your EP, Superpower. How did that come together?
Well, Vince Gill is like top 5 for me of all time, pantheon of heroes, for many reasons, but because he's so multifaceted. He's such an he's a world-class musician, guitar player, and he challenges himself not only in his artistry. He's a member of the Eagles now, touring, and he's a member of the Time Jumpers, which is an amazing Western swing institution in Nashville that you can go see on Monday nights. And so he's really challenged himself. Before he was successful as a solo artist, he was asked by Mark Knopfler to join Dire Straits as a guitar player. So that tells you the caliber of musician that he is. He has like the most angelic voice you've ever heard. He's an incredible songwriter, producer, and he's known by everyone as one of the most humble and genuine people around. And so I just model myself after every single one of those characteristics. I got to open 10 or 12 shows for him in 2019, and it was one of the biggest honors of my career to date, opening for him and seeing his show every night, and the monster musicians in his band like Tom Bukovac and Glenn Worf. So when we recorded By Way of Sorrow, which is the only song on the EP that I didn't write, it's a cover of a Julie Miller song, and it's absolutely beautiful. And we were trying to figure out who we should have sing harmony on it, because I was going to have a bunch of my friends come in. And my producer, Brandon Hood, said, Vince Gill would be amazing on this. And I said, you shoot for the stars, Brandon. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. And I could not believe that he said yes and sang harmony on it. I couldn't believe that he remembered me, because, just because you open for someone doesn't mean that they remember who you are 2 or 3 years later. So he was very complimentary about the song, and I'm just so honored to have him on it.
You have come by way of sorrow, you have come by way of tears, but you reach your destiny, meant to find you all these years, meant to find you all these. You have come by way of sorrow, you have come by way of tears, but you reach your destiny, meant to find you all these years.
I want to ask you about Zac Brown. You've played with the Zac Brown Band for a while now, and you joined them recently as a full-time member. What's it like being in a band with, 8 or 9 guys?
I would say I'm pretty used to it now. In the beginning, I was just so intimidated and so nervous on so many levels. Obviously, being the only woman, being a good 10 years younger than most or all of them, and then just feeling so inadequate in terms of musicianship next to them. And I don't say that with false humility. Like, genuinely, I still can't believe that I am deemed worthy to be on stage with them. It's such an incredible opportunity for me as a musician. I started opening for Zac in 2017. He was the first superstar to take me under his wing, and he asked me to open 2 shows for them. Then I ended up opening the whole tour, and then opened for them on and off for 3 years. And then the pandemic hit, so we didn't see each other or really speak to each other for a long while. And then I just got a call out of the blue in 2021 asking if I would come out on the road and play in the band, like utilities. And I had to clarify, like, you mean like me on stage with everyone? It was like, does not compute, And it sounds like a no-brainer now because it's such an organic part of my career. But at the time, I was putting out an album and I was like, can I do this? Should I do this? How will I balance this with my solo career? Which is obviously extremely important to me and something I'm always going to be 100 miles an hour on. But I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to learn from musicians of that caliber, and not even what it looks like on a resume to be in a band like that. But even just for me, looking back in 30 or 40 years, saying that I got to be a part of a dying breed of band that still sits in a room and sings and plays acoustically and doesn't use tracks, and everything is live and everyone is playing their ass off. And that doesn't happen that often anymore. We live in a very electronic world with lots of bells and whistles, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as a musician, to be able to sink your teeth in with guys of the quality of the Zac Brown Band is just an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. I was so honored.
There is a focus on musicianship in that band that is very unique in the world of country music.
Absolutely. That's what they're known for. And that's what I want to be known for. So I feel, again, really proud and really humbled to be a part of it and to hopefully contribute something, and also just to be allowed the space and the time to figure out what my role is and what my place is. Because I was kind of thrown in the deep end. It's not like I had a job description other than play these utility parts. So hopefully I'm starting to design a role for myself that all I want to do is just contribute to that band. And it's a very different side of my brain than being an artist, where everything's about you and everything is your vision and it's all consuming. This is so much fun because I get to come from the angle of, like, how do I contribute to this song? What do I add? What can I add? And like I said, it's a completely different discipline, and I really enjoy it because I love the guys and I look up to them so much. And Not only that, but I really resonate with Zac's music and his message and what they all stand for. So it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to find a way to contribute to it.
Well, you're kind of doing both. You have your role with Zac Brown Band, and then you've also got your own work and your own music. You're coming out with all kinds of music in the next few months. And I wanted to ask you about a song in particular called Million Little Band-Aids.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Zac and the whole band behind you, but this is very much your song and your story. Talk a little bit about that and how that came together.
Well, it's a very full circle moment for me because to have had the history that I've had with Zac Brown Band and then to have them singing on one of my songs that's so personal and elemental to me is really powerful. And it also just feels really natural and organic. I'm glad that it's happening at this time. But actually, I originally wrote that song with Zac in mind. People might not know what an emotional and spiritual cat Zac is because he's this tough, burly guy with a lot of power and runs his world. But he's a very sensitive and deeply feeling human being with a huge heart. And so he really resonated with the lyrics of this song. And actually, I sent it to him because I was struggling with the mix, the production. Some songs, the production's really easy to nail. And then some songs, it takes a lot of iterations, probably like a recipe. Sometimes you just happen upon an incredible recipe and you're like, shoot, did I write that down? And then sometimes you're like 20, 30 times into the testing and you're like, it's so close. So music is very similar. So I was struggling with the mix and I said, what do you think of this? What do you think of the mix? Because he's a great producer and has a great ear for mixes. And he said, you know, I love this song and I want to sing on it with you and I want to help you finish the production. And so it just happened very organically that way. And the other guys sang on it and lent their voices to it. And it means a lot to me to have them on it, especially a song that means so much to me. This song is really about growing up and realizing that it's actually more brave and more courageous and harder to open your heart than to close it down. And that a lot of the defense mechanisms that we develop over the course of our lives and when we're kids, they shoot you in the foot the more that you try to have deep relationships as you get older. Because the more closed off you are and the more arrogant you are and the more defensive you are, like the less you can be there for the people who you really love and your family and the people that matter. So it's a powerful message for me and I think for Zac too.
Let it hurt, let it bleed, let it be the fuel you need. Let the sunlight see your stars. Who told you that it was brave to live with a lonely heart? With a lonely heart. With a lonely heart. With a lonely heart.
Well, it's a very personal and a very vulnerable song. And honestly, to hear tough guy Zac singing on that really adds something.
Thank you. Thank you. I think so too. I'm so honored.
Well, Caroline, you've got a big event coming up in your life. As you mentioned, you and your husband, Nick, are expecting a baby.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I've got to ask, for a touring artist like yourself with so much going on, how do you plan for that?
I mean, obviously there's an element of magic and in the end it's up to God, right? But we talked about it for a long time because it was a big conversation for me. My husband has always wanted kids and he always wanted to be a father, but I didn't know if I wanted to. It wasn't something that I took for granted. Like one day I'll get married and have kids. I really in my 20s thought I never would because I was just so career focused and there's such a sense of mutual exclusivity that can come with a really all-consuming and high-pressure job, like being a musician, being in the music industry. Frankly, for anyone with a high-pressure job who's trying to do it at the highest level, it's just harder to be a woman. And I don't say that like for pity. It's a huge investment for us to start a family, much more than being a man. And that's just a fact of life and something that you have to navigate if you're a woman. which is also an incredible gift as I'm learning now. But it's really scary when you've built your whole life around your career and your dream. And some women feel like, oh, I've done that. I've reached the top of that mountain and now I want to have a family. But that's not me. I feel like I'm just getting started. So it was a big conversation for us, and something that I was really nervous would affect my career in the eyes of other people. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to do both well. And so when we decided that we were ready to have kids, then there's the whole thing of like, well, it's ideal to have a baby in the winter because I'm not touring, so I can take the time that I need, or else I'd have to miss a year of touring. Like, I sound like an athlete, but it's true. And I want to take that time. It's such a magical time. If you're going to become a parent, to take those 3 or 4 months, or some people have longer, some people have shorter, you're never going to get that back. And I'm just an all or nothing person. So that kind of stuff really matters to me. So yeah, we planned it as best we could, and we're having a baby. I literally finished tour, and then 3 weeks later, we'll have a baby. It's all part of a grander plan, and it's a beautiful thing. We're so excited. Sometimes it's really overwhelming and stressful because I'll be touring right up until 37 weeks. So having never been pregnant before, trying to figure out what I'll be capable of in October when my album comes out is something that we're all trying to navigate, and something that you just don't have the answers on until you've lived it. I'm so grateful to have a team that supports me and a husband that supports me, and it's hopefully will be an inspiration to other women. That would be my ideal, because I know there were a lot of women like Carrie Underwood and Maren Morris and Sheryl Crow that really were anchors for me when I was making this decision of like, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it.
Well, and I have a feeling it's going to inspire some great songs.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I just have such a melty heart. I can't imagine myself as a little baby. Oh my God.
And I guess y'all are staying in Nashville for the foreseeable future?
Yes, we are. We're in Franklin, so.
All right, so just one more question for you, Caroline. So what are some of your hopes when you think about raising a kid in the South?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. Well, I would say my biggest is that we love nature. And I feel like, as hippy-dippy as it might sound, or as cliche as it might sound, when I can get into trees and grass and dirt and mud and bushes and river, I connect to that same magic that I felt as a kid. Like when I would go outside and imagine songs and stories and poems, I just feel like such a different person when I'm out in nature. And so that's really important to me and my husband. That's why we moved to Franklin, where we are so lucky to have access to nature, because not everybody does. But that's really important to us and to a child, because I want them to have that as the basis of like an energetic wavelength of life. Because feeling those natural cycles, seeing the seasons, that was the best part of my childhood, was that my dad is so passionate about the outdoors. For him, it's hunting and fishing. But whatever it is that you enjoy doing outdoors, I really feel for so many kids in our society who grow up without that, because being attached to a screen for your whole life, it's so unnatural. And I think it's really affecting the mental health of our kids. So I would say being outdoors, being without a screen for as many years as possible, developing your imagination and learning how to be bored and think of things to do and climb a tree and like converse with other children and adults. These are things that sound so basic, but we're really losing it. And I would say that's number one. And then number two would be just the hospitality and generosity that is a cliche of Southern people, but is really important in this day and age, because having a real sense of accountability in a community is really important to my husband and I. And something that's been really important for me to develop in music. Like, I've developed this amazing, beautiful community of musician friends that inspire me and challenge me. And when I was in my 20s and I had more of a chip on my shoulder and was more ambitious, and my dad used to tell me, all that's going to matter to you later is the quality of your friendships and relationships. And I'd be like, well, I'll show you, Dad. But, he's right. It's sad because you never want your parent to be right.
You don't like to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But it is true. And so I feel like that's still a tenant in the South. That's a really beautiful one.
Well, you're in a beautiful place and you've got some beautiful things ahead of you. So congratulations on all that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're so excited. Thank you, Sid. That's so sweet. Thank you.
Well, Caroline Jones, thanks so much for being on Biscuits and Jam.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Caroline Jones. Southern Living is based in Birmingham, Alabama. Be sure to follow Biscuits and Jam on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And we'd love your feedback. If you could rate this podcast and leave us a review, we'd really appreciate it. You can also find us online at southernliving.com/biscuitsandjam. Our theme song is by Sean Watkins of Nickel Creek. I hope you'll join us next week for my conversation with the actor and musician Dennis Quaid. We'll see you then.